Regardless of the sport, soccer, baseball, basketball, or any contact sport, if you're a fan or casual viewer, you'll watch and fully enjoy it. As the physical abilities that many achieve make them look almost superhuman, but many times these feats are only possible because, in fact, they really are superhuman. Or at least the super version of themselves. Because even though they have the technical knowledge to perform them, their bodies are enhanced with performance-enhancing drugs. Today, on Say No Trouble's Professional Wrestler, we're going to talk about this topic that remains one of the cancers embedded in the sports world and continues to cause havoc and controversy. Before we start, I'd like to clarify something. When I say performance-enhancing drugs, I'm talking about a whole category of which the steroids we're going to focus on today are a part. Also, I want to clarify that just because an athlete, sportsman, or fighter tests positive in a doping test, it doesn't necessarily mean they're using steroids or substances, as there are lists of banned substances that vary by sport. Not because they improve your performance per se, but because these substances have effects on the athlete's body, like diuretics, for example.
It's also important to point out that just because they don't test positive doesn't mean they're not taking substances.
It may seem shocking or contradictory, but let's break it down step by step. Essentially, and applying the scientific definition, steroids are lipids characterized by a core of 4 fused carbon rings. This essential structure forms the foundation for various molecules with a wide array of biological roles, categorized into multiple groups. But the two most relevant for our discussion are corticosteroids and anabolic-androgenic steroids. Corticoids are hormones produced by the adrenal cortex, a gland located above the kidneys, this one right here. They are fundamental for the regulation of a number of bodily processes, including the inflammatory response, sugar metabolism, electrolyte balance, and the response to stress. Medications like prednisone or dexamethasone are synthetic corticosteroids used to treat a variety of medical conditions, such as asthma, allergies, and autoimmune diseases. This type of steroid can be administered at any hospital or taken orally depending on your condition. These are not problematic yet. The problem lies with the ones that come next. Anabolic-androgenic steroids are perhaps the most well-known and controversial. They are part of the diet of any bodybuilder and have been present in a multitude of high-performance sports. And they are nothing more than synthetic derivatives of testosterone, the main male sex hormone. The one that feminist allies are lacking and the one your girlfriend's gay friend has in excess. The term anabolic refers to the ability of these substances to promote tissue growth, particularly skeletal muscle and androgenic tissue, to their masculinizing effects like body hair development and voice deepening. For women, I'm unsure of the effects. The size of the clitoris that grows?
Many of those drugs, anabolic steroids, they affect the testosterone receptors. In the clitoris, there are receptors causing growth of the clitoris.
Types of anabolic-androgenic steroids, there are a variety of them, each with its own characteristics in terms of potency, duration, action, and side effects. But among the usual suspects, we have Nandrolone decanoate is a popular anabolic steroid because of its ability to promote muscle growth and improve joint recovery. Bodybuilders love it. For more info, watch the Ronnie Coleman video, where we discuss this further. Stanosolol, or as it's commercially known, Winstrol, is a steroid often used by athletes who are looking for lean muscle gains and greater definition. And I think it goes without saying who uses it the most in sports, because it's pretty obvious. Then you have others like methandrostenolone, trenbolone, and boldenone. All these chemicals we've talked about will get you really big, but they have side effects to keep in mind. The effects of anabolic steroids are a double-edged sword. While performance-enhancing drugs offer noticeable physical benefits, they also pose significant health risks. Let's start with the positives, or at least the ones you expect to get when you take them. Increase in muscle mass. Since anabolic steroids promote protein synthesis and nitrogen retention in the muscles, you end up experiencing accelerated muscle growth, which translates into an increase in strength and muscle size. By increasing muscle mass, your ability to generate strength also improves. This is advantageous in sports that require explosiveness, power, and/or muscle size. like weightlifting, bodybuilding, powerlifting, or any derivative of contact sports. And yes, they are very different sports, but there's room for this in all of them. Wow, I can't find any flaws in his logic. Some of these secret juices have properties that can help reduce body fat, either directly or indirectly, by increasing metabolism and preserving muscle mass during weight loss. Anabolics, depending on which one it is, can obviously speed up muscle recovery after intense workouts, allowing athletes to train or compete more frequently and with greater volume. The health risks associated with the use of anabolic steroids are numerous and can be serious, affecting multiple body systems. But it's also important to keep in mind that these risks are associated with how long they've been used and the amounts, obviously. Yes, they can mess you up. If you have doubts, here are some examples. Steroids can cause sodium and water retention, which can lead to increased blood pressure, which in turn increases the risk of heart disease. They can lower high-density lipoprotein cholesterol, the good cholesterol, and increase low-density lipoprotein cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, raising the risk of atherosclerosis and cardiovascular diseases. This is serious. Thickening of the left ventricle of the heart, a condition called cardiac hypertrophy, essentially an enlarged heart. And it's not that you can hold more love, but that your heart is overloaded and this can lead to heart failure. Well, that's it. You also have unwanted aesthetic side effects, like gynecomastia in men, since some steroids can be converted into estrogens in the body, and that's how you get man boobs, and general virilization in women, like a deeper voice, growth of facial and body hair, male pattern baldness, reduction or disappearance of the breasts, and as I mentioned before, enlargement of the clitoris. These effects can be irreversible. It's a mutation, but there are many more, right? You risk suffering from blood clots, severe liver damage, jaundice, the yellowing of the skin, and very noticeably, the whites of the eyes. Also, your body could stop producing its own testosterone and your testicles could shrink, to mood swings, psychological dependence, and severe acne. They can also cause damage to tendons and ligaments, which leads to injuries like this. And here's a very important warning for the kids who are thinking about it. The use of steroids can cause the premature closure of growth plates. That is, if you use them before you finish developing, they can stop your height growth forever. So you were going to have a hard time on Tinder? Remember, we're only discussing steroids here. The reality is that these substances are usually combined with others like growth hormone, which makes the chemical cocktail even worse. But we're not going to get into that today. This is insane and extremely demanding on the body, transforming you into a physical superhuman. But the cost is very steep. And I understand if you do it because you're a professional in X or Y sport and you have to accept it. But if you do it just because you want to be the strongest in the gym, you're a complete idiot. I say this because Spanish police themselves already warn about it. The trafficking of anabolic steroids is a huge business that's taking ground away from classic drugs. The profile of the consumer has expanded to the point. In summary, those seeking physique enhancement for the gym, public service exams, or summer are the main users. And another problem it has is, where does this stuff come from? From underground labs in India with no kind of control while they're taking this. Or sometimes they just give you substances meant for veterinary use. The trail of broken lives extends across all elite sports, for example in cycling. Tom Simpson collapsed during the Tour de France with his body full of amphetamines. In American football, the giant Lyle Alzado directly blamed steroids for the brain cancer that consumed him. In baseball, most valuable player Ken Caminiti died with a heart shattered by years of abuse. In wrestling, the tragedy of Chris Benoit and the cocktail of drugs that led to pure terror is well known. Or in athletics, with the iconic sprinter Florence Griffith Joyner, nicknamed Floyo, who mysteriously passed away at 38, leaving behind very high records and an eternal shadow of suspicion. And speaking of sports, it's not exactly known when the relationship between steroids and sports began, but it is known that it's long and controversial. Just like your relationship with your ex, it's problematic. Since anabolic steroids were first synthesized in the 1930s, their appeal to many athletes and elite sportsmen was evident. The promise of enhanced performance, faster recovery, and a competitive edge made more than one person drool. Especially in elite professional sports, where money is involved, there are interests at stake, and winning is everything. Historically speaking, the use of steroids began to be detectable and regulated in sports starting in the 1960s. And it was the Rome Olympic Games that saw the first confirmed death due to doping.
I wasn't expecting that.
The victim would be the Danish cyclist Knut Enemark Jensen. This obviously raised alarms and led to the creation of stricter anti-doping policies. However, as detection methods improved, so did the attempts by athletes and their teams to evade these controls. They added chemists and doctors to the athletes' staff, resulting in what many today call the science of doping. You know, if I mix this with that, if I inject this, if I inject that and eat something else. We won't get into that today, but I want you to understand the concept. And if you want a direct example of how doping science works, go watch the video about Lance Armstrong because he almost got away with it. The PhD in chemistry. Contact sports like boxing or mixed martial arts present a unique context for steroid use. Why? Well, because here, strength and power are not only competitive advantages, but they also directly influence the ability to inflict damage on the opponent and to withstand punishment. Damn it. And what are these advantages that fighters seek or hope to gain by using these substances? Firstly, bigger and stronger muscles lead to greater punching power, allowing you to increase the force behind your strikes. We also have better endurance. And watch out, it's not that steroids are mainly drugs for this purpose. It's more like an added effect, but the ability to recover more quickly between rounds or intense training sessions is valuable for a fighter. They also hope to get faster recovery. It's not like they turn you into Wolverine either, but fast recovery is crucial for a sport where the body takes constant punishment. An athlete who recovers faster can train harder, can train more often, and can also fight more. It's difficult to determine precisely when contact sports began being affected. In the early days of mixed martial arts, it was clear that multiple fighters were using performance-enhancing drugs alongside their diet. What can be said is that, for example, in boxing, in the 1980s and early 1990s, there was an increase in public concern about doping. As the physiques of some boxers seemed to change drastically and steroid science advanced, athletic commissions and sports organizations began to implement stricter testing and sanctions. Although when it comes to sanctions, at least in boxing, it depends on who you are. In organized mixed martial arts, the presence of steroids was practically there from the very beginning. And obviously, it also depended on the promotion, but there was one promotion where the use of these substances wasn't a problem. That was Pride. There, the tests weren't to find out if you were using them, but to find out why the hell you weren't. Bob Sapp, Mark Coleman, Don Freit, Mark Kerr, Kevin Randleman. We have stories about all of them. They're just a few examples of what you would see in Pride. And honestly, nobody cared. Why? Because you had these guys. With Herculean physiques fighting and giving you a great show, the show was what the Japanese audience loved. And that's it. However, other disciplines like boxing also have an extensive share of injuries. Here are some of the most outstanding examples from that time. Fernando Vargas tested positive for stanozolol in 2002 before his anticipated fight against Oscar de la Hoya. Vargas, like any good steroid user, denied having used the substance intentionally, but the positive test resulted in a suspension and a stain on his career. There's also the case of James Toney, a boxer with a long and distinguished career. But he faced multiple issues due to the use of banned substances, including steroids. In 2005, he tested positive for nandrolone after his fight against John Ruiz for the World Boxing Association heavyweight title. The result of the fight was changed to no contest and Toney was fined and suspended. After a while, he even went into mixed martial arts and obviously he kept taking Paulo Costa's secret juices. The most notable recent case is Canelo Alvarez, who tested positive for clenbuterol in 2018, supposedly for eating contaminated meat. According to the boxer's defense, this steroid is used in Mexico to fatten up cattle.
I never did it to enhance my performance. I would never do that in my life. It was simply an oversight on my part, not educating myself about this issue in Mexico.
You Mexicans will have to tell me. Honestly, I don't know. If it's true, now I know. That's where Oberon used to buy the meat. But the number of boxers under the tutelage of Eddie Reynoso who have tested positive for substances is at the very least suspicious. But it's time to talk about the elephant in the room. I know that most people don't give a damn. If some unknown fighter has taken jet fuel to fight in some godforsaken promotion, most people, or at least most of you, want to know what's going on with doping in the UFC. Well, the UFC has allegedly had fighters using substances since the very first events. However, from 2000 until United States Anti-Doping Agency's arrival, many fighters were more juiced up than Ivan Drago from Rocky IV. But why did this happen? Well, to begin with, let's remember that the UFC started out in states where there were no athletic or boxing commissions. I discussed this in the video about the UFC's arise and moves. And as expected, in the absence of these commissions, it wasn't necessary to prove that you weren't using steroids, and therefore, many people did it. Obviously, by the 2000s, things took a different turn. As UFC, under the management of the big boss, Dana White, started holding events in states with athletic commissions, drug tests conducted by the commissions also began to appear. But the problem with these tests is that they used to be 24 to 48 hours before the fight and, at most, a week before. And after the fight, the same thing. This allowed the fighters and their teams to get around the tests with great success. Well, you could do your whole training camp taking anything from testosterone to Popeye's spinach. And then, close to the fight, you would clean your system of whatever you had put in your body and step into the cage. With all the advantages given by the substances, but with little chance of being detected in tests and being able to appear clean or natural.
Before United States Anti-Doping Agency, there was talk of certain camps that would hire guys who knew testing, and these guys would orchestrate a program for these fighters to make sure that they didn't get caught.
The first significant case of this stage occurred in 2002. And the one who tested positive for substances was Josh Barnett, who was stripped of the UFC heavyweight title after testing positive for boldenone, fluoxymesterone, and nandrolone. The following year, Tim Sylvia would follow, who in his first defense of the heavyweight title tested positive for stanozolol. To discuss substance use in the UFC, we must mention the greatest offenders of these practices. Vitor Belfort is one of the most complex and long-standing cases in mixed martial arts. This former UFC champion, because yes, for those who don't know, he was the champion of the UFC tournament and later the light heavyweight champion, has had a lot of problems because of substances. When he returned to the UFC after being away for a while, he already had a history of substance use, specifically 4-hydroxytestosterone. This positive test occurred at a Pride event in the United States, resulting in bothersome anti-doping tests that Japanese promoters disliked. And later, in UFC, he found what would become his own super soldier serum, the so-called testosterone replacement therapy, which is nothing more than giving you synthetic testosterone to raise the levels of this hormone. Generally, its use is medical and it's prescribed to people with hypogonadism, meaning those who lack this hormone. An average member, to add. Vitor managed to get testosterone replacement therapy prescribed to him for an alleged case of clinical hypogonadism, which means that his testosterone levels were below what is usual for a man of his age. And with this, the Nevada Athletic Commission had no choice but to grant him a medical exemption. A completely legal move, and it could be true. Remember that the use of steroids can have this side effect. And also, if we add the extreme weight cuts that fighters go through, which also have this side effect, Vitor had hearing and comprehension problems. He misunderstood the doctor's instructions of 1 injection every 5 days as 5 injections daily. Why did he end up looking like Optimus Prime? This allowed him to shorten his life, but extend his career and leave us with epic moments, like when he messed up Michael Bisping's eye. With testosterone replacement therapy, giving back the juiced physique of his 20s to a Vitor Belfort worn out by 1,000 battles and substances, close to 40, many fighters started to use the same strategy, so eventually the athletic commissions banned its use. The problem is that Belfort tested positive again for elevated testosterone levels before his title fight against Chris Weidman. In 2015, when its use was already banned, making it quite clear that he hadn't stopped using it.
His testosterone level was beyond what any human could naturally achieve.
His case was emblematic of the testosterone replacement therapy era in mixed martial arts. The testosterone replacement therapy case is unique as it extends beyond the anabolic substances discussed in this video. It's a hormonal treatment that only causes problems when you abuse it. And this shows us how wide the range of options is that athletes and fighters have when it comes to cheating. Since I'm unsure if I'll cover this in a separate video, I've included it here as a subsection. Another quite relevant case, which in fact was a catalyst for implementing stricter testing, was that of the fantastic trash talker, Chel Sonnen, who had a series of doping issues that tarnished his career. In 2010, he tested positive for elevated testosterone levels, resulting in a suspension following his title fight against Anderson Silva, who he nearly beat as he dominated Silva for almost the entire 5 rounds. However, Anderson caught him with a triangle, I think in the last minute. However, since he tested positive, he was suspended, so even a win wouldn't have mattered. In this case, it was for above normal testosterone levels through testosterone replacement therapy, as he was conveniently diagnosed with hypogonadism in 2008. Quite a coincidence, isn't it? In 2014, he tested positive once more, with more substances in his system than a periodic table contains. They found anastrozole, clomiphene, and to top it off, erythropoietin and human growth hormone, which resulted in a long suspension from mixed martial arts. And of course, we must continue discussing John Jones. And as we mentioned in his respective Volume 1, Jones's career has been marked by several doping issues. In 2016, he tested positive for clomiphene and letrozole, both anti-estrogenic agents. And what is that? Well, these are substances that are used after a cycle of steroids to mitigate their side effects. This is known as a post-cycle. He was suspended for a year, but tested positive again in 2017.
Oops, he did it again.
This time for oral turinabol and anabolic steroid. This was specifically after his fight against Daniel Cormier, resulting in the victory being overturned and a 15-month suspension. Jones's cases have been devastating for his reputation and for the perception of the integrity of the sport, and I think in fact even ironic. Because he complained at the time when he fought Vitor Burford, who was over the testosterone limit, and he complained that allowing this threatened his health. Later, he would become the threat. Despite all this, he's undoubtedly the greatest of all time and you remain silent? But now it's time to talk about the 2 huge muscular elephants in the room who've been through more cycles than the Mayan calendar. First, let's discuss Brock Lesnar. Brock was in the UFC when athletic commissions were responsible for testing. And even though he came out clean during this time, it's pretty obvious that you don't get this physique just by eating chicken and vegetables. However, he got away with it during this stage. But when he came back in 2016 with United States Anti-Doping Agency already active in the UFC, things went pretty badly for him. He tested positive for clomiphene and for hydroxyclomiphene. Coincidentally, one of these tests was before his UFC 200 fight and the next one was after it. When it became known, Mark Hunt sued Dana White, UFC, and Brock Lesnar, basically claiming that they were all conspiring so that Lesnar could fight, even though they knew he was doped. According to sources, although his claims have a solid legal basis, the courts have not ruled in his favor. Mark Hunt had every fucking right to be
mad. They put him in there with a guy who's coming off rocket fucking fuel. Look at the size of his fucking head. He's taking shit that makes your fucking head grow.
And of course, we can't finish this video without mentioning the man who, unintentionally, became the official image of what the UFC was with steroids. No. Well, yes. Of all those who remember, or at least have seen even once this photo of Oberyn showing his muscles at a weigh-in back in 2011, no one with half a brain and a bit of common sense is going to buy that excuse that he looked like that because he ate horse meat, which is what he claimed. Look, this guy does eat horse meat in his daily diet, and he also eats, I think, like 8 times a day. I mentioned this in his story, and there's no doubt that this is going to make you big, especially if you have the metabolism of a big person. The meat Oberyn ate was likely from Mexico since it miraculously gave him the physique of Mike Menster. That's hard to believe. Officially speaking and looking at the data, Oberyn only tested positive in the UFC once. How? What? Specifically in April 2012 with elevated testosterone levels, specifically epitestosterone, of more than 10:1. The maximum level accepted at the time by the Nevada Athletic Commission was 6:1. In his defense before the commission, his lawyer said that Alistair took an anti-inflammatory medication to treat an injury in one of his knees. He was unaware that the medication contained testosterone. The commission obviously didn't believe this story and suspended him for 9 months. Do you think I'm stupid? With the arrival of United States Anti-Doping Agency to the UFC, their constant testing regime both in and out of competition, and the tightening of sanctions, the fighters and their teams had to stop the practice or take risks with new methods. But at least while United States Anti-Doping Agency worked with the UFC, it was quite evident that there was a change for the better. You could see who tested positive, and everything was quite public and well known. I'm not referring to fighters like Islam Makhachev or Yoel Romero, as Islam is a religion. He was able to prove that his positive result was due to medication he was taking for a heart condition he was keeping secret. And Romero, on his part, was because of a contaminated supplement. And although United States Anti-Doping Agency didn't seem to believe him at first, they investigated and proved that the supplement was indeed contaminated. So, even though he tested positive, they proved his innocence. But what about Joel? I believe he's just a genetic experiment from Cuba that Russia funded. In his story, we'll discuss it. With the new UFC anti-doping program and DFSI, I'm less confident now. When was the last time you heard about a positive test? Have tainted supplements, horse meat consumption, and medication errors stopped, or have cheating methods simply improved significantly? The tests aren't as strict anymore. Or, alternatively, depending on who is affected and the consequences it could have for the business. It's unclear if decisions will be made, which is unfortunate for non-star wrestlers. However, this isn't an accusation, just an opinion. It's a legitimate question about how different things are now compared to before and why things are, let's say, so secretive now. The truth is that as long as there's money involved, ambition, and often the unhealthy need and obsession to win or be the best, which is part of the champion's mentality, besides interests, sometimes political or international ones as well, is the problem with steroids, hormones, or any substance to enhance sports performance going to be there? And this is kind of a taboo. It's a well-known fact that these substances are prevalent in gyms, sports, and among athletes, so it's unclear why it's considered an open secret. Pretending we don't know or that athletes are innocent doesn't help, it just makes us look like hypocrites. In my opinion, there are two possible solutions, and neither of them is this limbo we're living in. Either you really ban it with much harsher penalties, like a total expulsion from sports for 5 years or a massive fine that really hurts. Or if you're not going to do that, just admit it, legalize them, and make them part of the game. This creates an impossible situation for honest athletes, similar to the pro-steroid Olympics that already exist. Because if you don't use them, you're at a huge disadvantage compared to those who do. But if you do it in a sport where it's forbidden, you have to hide it. You can't say it, and then you automatically become a liar and a fraud. The sports world is unwilling or unready to discuss this, so we'll do it ourselves. Leave your opinion down below. Tell me, what path do you think sports should take to deal with this situation? One of the two options I've suggested, or is there another one you can think of? Or maybe staying as we are is the best and I just can't see it. Thank you for being here. See you next time.